morning. I woke up this morning with the craziest stomach bug. And so I was begging Angela to preach for me. She's like, I don't have anything to preach. So we're going to hope for a Michael Jordan experience this morning because I'm so excited about this message. And it is about how God works behind the scenes, okay? In our lives, even when we don't realize it, He is always working. So 2 weeks ago, we were here, and many of you prayed for me to go to Africa for a conference, a Christian CEO conference, a speaking engagements that I had. And I want to tell you the behind-the-scenes story on how that all happened, okay, because it ties perfectly into this message. So 2 years ago, when the Lord gave me the vision around our faith and work movement, it's called 94X. We were talking about it a little bit in Sunday school, and it basically, the purpose of the movement is to let business leaders know that you can bring God into your business, okay? It is not illegal. It is illegal to force religion on somebody, but you can offer all day long. You can offer a prayer team. You can offer a Bible study. You can offer to pray for somebody. That is not illegal. And so our goal through this movement is to let leaders know that you can. And if they want to do that, we provide them resources for how to do that. So when the Lord gave me the vision around starting 94X, He told me that it was going to be global. In fact, He said there will be 100,000 roundtable meetings all over the world associated with this movement. About 6 months ago, me and my two partners were in the office, and things have gone very well. Art has been a huge part of getting curriculum built, and it's very, very exciting, but it is very local. You know, it's just something that's starting here and kind of moving out, and I was just telling my partners, I said, the one thing I don't see is any way that this thing goes global. I said, I just don't see it. I said, I don't know how to take something global. I don't know anybody globally. They don't either. So here is what happened, okay? I have a friend in Joplin, Missouri named Dave Wilkins, and I hope Dave's watching today. He watches quite a bit. And we had a meeting at the bank, and he said, Sean, you've got to meet this guy in Kansas City, Missouri, by the name of Bob Frazier. He was a big faith and work guy just like you. I know you guys would be best of friends. You got to meet. So I cold call Bob Frazier, and I say, hey, this is who I am. Love to meet you. And he's like, come on up. So I go up to Kansas City. He's a shareholder in our bank. We become best of friends. And while I was there, he says, you have to read this book. And he gives me a book called God Out of the Box, which I highly recommend if you have a chance. It's very hard to find the book, but it is wonderful, God Out of the Box, if you're watching online. And it is by a guy by the name of Chuck Ripka. So I rarely read. I am normally an Audible listener, but this book is not available on Audible, so I did read it. It's not very long, and it tells these remarkable stories about this man who is kind of a mid-level loan officer within a bank in Minnesota, and how he hears from God, and how he would literally be in his office, and God would tell him, hey, that person out at the teller line is being embezzled. You need to go let him know. Or this person is having health problems. You need to pray for them. Or this person is having emotional challenges. You need to pray for them. And he's very, very obedient. And so this mid-level mortgage loan officer, ends up on the front cover of the New York Times, the biggest newspaper in France, biggest newspaper in Germany, speaks all over the world. Okay, it's remarkable, this guy's life. So I asked Bob, I said, Bob, do you know this guy? And he's like, oh, yeah. He said, he's really a cool guy. And I said, could you introduce us? I said, I want to understand how he hears so clearly from God. So again, I reach out. So he's on vacation. He calls me whenever he gets back from vacation. We strike up a wonderful friendship. And Chuck Ripka is the reason I got to go to Africa. So Chuck has spoken all over the world, and in this large conference in Abidjan, Africa, which is kind of in the Ivory Coast, reached out to him and said, "Hey, we would love for you to come be our keynote speaker, but we need another one. Do you know of somebody else that could come as well?" And he invited me, and now 94X has been spread to 27 countries throughout Africa. That is how the Lord works, okay? I had no idea when Dave Wilkins was in my office a year ago that it would lead to Bob Frazier and to Chuck Ripka and our first global initiative around 94X. The same thing happens all throughout the Bible, okay? If you study the Bible, what you see is that God is always at work. When David was a shepherd boy, God knew he was going to be a king, okay? When Joseph's life, when he basically is sold into slavery, he's falsely accused by Potiphar's wife, when he's thrown into prison, he knows he's going to become the most powerful person in his country. He already knew that. He's already working behind the scenes to make this happen. When Esther is just an ordinary peasant girl, he knew that she was going to be the queen at a perfect time to save the Jewish race. He already knows. He knows right now what is going to happen in your life next year, in 5 years, in 10 years. It is remarkable. I want to tell you a story that my friend Chuck, the guy from Minnesota, told when we were in Africa that is almost unbelievable, but I know that I know for a fact that it is the truth. So Chuck said that one morning he was driving into work and he was praying, and the Lord told him that he was going to bring a gentleman by the name of Carl Pohlad to Christ. Now, Carl Pohlad was one of the 10 wealthiest people in America. He was the wealthiest person in Minnesota. He owned Chuck's bank, but that was one of about 150 companies that he owned. So again, I want you to picture, this would be like George Kaiser, okay, that owns BOK and 3/4 of Tulsa, being brought to Christ by a loan officer that is in one of his branches, okay, of Bank of Oklahoma. It's the same type of deal. So the Lord says, you're going to bring Carl to Jesus. And Chuck's like, God, how am I even going to meet Carl Pohlad? I mean, how would it even happen? I'm like 15 rungs down from him on the org chart. How would we even meet each other? And then one day, lo and behold, Chuck gets a call from Carl Pohlad. Carl Pohlad calls Chuck to say, hey, Chuck, you're working on a loan for a friend of mine, and I'm wondering if you can maybe help him out on some fees, cut some fees. And of course, Chuck's like, well, yeah, you own the bank. If you want to cut the fees, we cut the fees. Whatever you say goes. And he said, while they're on that call, he is asking God, is this the time? Is this the time? And he said, no, it's not the time yet. So he said, okay. So he helps his friend with the loan. 2 months later, God says, you need to reach out and ask Carl to go to lunch. Chuck's like, Carl Pohlad's not going to go to lunch with me? I mean, we only talked that one time. There is no way. Sure enough, he's very obedient. He picks up the phone. He calls, gets a hold of Carl's assistant, tells her who he is, and Carl agrees to go to lunch with him. Okay? Now, he said the lunch got delayed about a year because Carl owned the Minnesota Twins, and that was in the middle of the big baseball strike. Okay? So he had a lot of things going on, so it got delayed a year, but he stayed patient. Chuck, I can tell you, is very perseverant. And so he called, and finally they got back on the calendar a year later. They go to lunch. Chuck said that the night before they were going to lunch, his wife had been praying, and his wife said, you need to take banana nut bread to the lunch tomorrow with Carl. And Chuck's like, well, how dorky is that? And by the way, the only thing they had in the house to carry the banana nut bread was this pink plastic bag. So he's like, I'm going to go to lunch with the richest man in Minnesota with banana nut bread and a pink plastic bag. But he's like, okay. His wife said this is what he had to do. His wife hears from the Lord as well. So he does. So they go to lunch. He carries in the banana nut bread, gives it to Carl. Carl says, that is my wife's favorite food. And his wife also said, be sure and pray before the meal. Be sure that you pray before the lunch. And he's like, yes, dear. Yes, Mom, I will pray. So he said he prayed before the meal. And Carl said, I'm so glad you did that. He said, I wish more people would pray before the meal. So he's like, okay, my wife is 2 for 2. I'm killing it. I'm killing it here. So they go through their lunch. They only had 45 minutes for lunch. It took an hour and a half. They start telling Carl, you've got a meeting, you're late for a meeting back at the office. And so Chuck is going, got it, now. And God said, Chuck, you ask Carl if you can pray for him back at his office. So he goes, okay. So he goes, Carl, would you mind real quick before your meeting if I pray for you back at your office? And he said, no, that'd be fine. So during their lunch, Carl had mentioned to Chuck that he had real bad pain in his ankles and feet, that he was having a hard time walking. So they went back to the office. Chuck prayed for his feet and for his legs. And he said he got down on all fours, and as he prayed for him, he said his hands turned super hot, like real hot, and he was healed right there on the spot. The pain that he had had in his feet and legs went away. And so the whole time he's going, now God, and God goes, yes, now you need to ask him. So as he's walking out, he says, Carl, he said, I feel like I'm supposed to ask you one more question, and that is, if you were to die tonight, would you go to heaven? Would you spend eternity with Jesus? And Carl said, yes, I would. And Chuck said, well, how do you know? And Carl said, because I'm Catholic. And Chuck said, well, Carl, a denomination does not get you into heaven. Only a relationship accepting Jesus Christ as your Savior. Have you prayed that prayer with him? And Carl said, no. And he said, would you like to pray that prayer? And he said, yes, I would. And he brought him to Christ there in his office. God is working all of this out. Now, my favorite part of the story is that when he left his office, he said they ended up with a lifelong relationship. He brought many of his family to Christ. He prayed for them on many occasions. This turned into a very, very deep relationship. But he said as he was leaving his office, he goes and he said he was on like the 52nd floor of the tallest building, he owned it, I think. And so he comes down and he said he's going back to Chuck's going back to his office at the bank. And he said he walks by a homeless man on the corner, and God says, I want you to pray with him just like you prayed with Carl. And Chuck said, God, it's raining, it's sleeting, I got on my best suit, my top coat, really? And he's like, yes, the same way. So he said he stopped and asked that man how he could pray for him, got on all fours. The man said he had arthritis in his hands hurt all the time, reached out, held his hands. Chuck's hands got real hot once again, healed the man's hand, brought him to Jesus right there on the corner. And God said, Chuck, I am no respecter of persons. That was just as important as what you did up on 52. Isn't that cool? God is always working. I had an experience, on Eclipse Day, okay? I don't know if you guys remember the Eclipse Day that we had. I was down in Waco, Texas, and I was meeting with a guy by the name of David Wills with National Christian Foundation, and we were talking about, I was sharing this vision that I had with David that we need a national faith-based bank. We really need a national Christian bank. It doesn't happen so much here, but around the country, a lot of people get canceled within certain banks because of their religious beliefs. So I was just sharing with them. I said, I really think this is something that our country needs. And he said, I'll tell you, there's this guy, and I'm not going to use his last name here, but he said, there's this guy named Casey you ought to visit with. He has been very, very successful. He has a similar vision. I think you guys should get together. He could be your partner in this venture. So about 2 weeks ago, I'm over in Oklahoma City at Hobby Lobby at a deal with John Maxwell and David Green, and I'm visiting with John Maxwell's CEO outside in the hallway while the session's going on inside. And Mark is his name, and he said, right in the middle of the conversation, we're just talking about something totally different, and he goes, "Oh my gosh, Sean, there's a guy in here you have to meet." And so he goes in and brings out this real tall, 6'5", super good looking guy, and brings him up. And he said, "I want to introduce you to Casey, who's the same guy that David Wills had just told me about in Waco, Texas 2 weeks ago. We have a call tomorrow for 2 hours to talk about launching a national faith-based bank." God was at work, okay? God was at work. He knew how all of these things were going to play out. It's really remarkable. In the New Testament, you see the same thing. Think about this. In Acts 16, Paul and his companions are traveling to preach the gospel, okay? They're kept by the Holy Spirit from preaching the word in the province of Asia. They tried to enter another country. The Spirit of God would not allow them to go in. Instead, Paul receives a vision of a man of Macedonia stating and begging him, "Come over to Macedonia to preach to us." And so Paul brings the word to the Gentiles. That is God at work. Jesus, the entire narrative of Jesus' life is filled with God working behind the scenes, from the angel's announcement to Joseph's dreams to the journey to Bethlehem. Every step is orchestrated by God. Romans 8:28 says, "And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose." So even when we face things that to us, we were just talking about this in Sunday school, that look like trials and challenges, God is at work. Things do not always go the way we want them to go. They're going to go the way that God wants them to go. Proverbs 3, 5, and 6 reminds us to trust in the Lord with all our heart and lean not on our own understanding. In all our ways, submit to him. Corrie ten Boom, the Holocaust survivor, once said, "Never be afraid to trust an unknown future to a known God." C.S. Lewis wrote, "God whispers to us in our pleasures, speaks in our conscience, but shouts in our pains. It's his megaphone to rouse a deaf world. Even in our suffering, God is working." I want to read this to you. This was a post on Facebook by a friend of mine, and I thought that it really fit well into what we're talking about today. His name is Phil Busey, and he lives in Oklahoma City. He said, "I am sharing an important anniversary. May 20th, 2013, 13 years ago today, was a life-changing day for me. Kathy Calloway Busey and our family. We were frightened but found a way forward together and never looked back, and that made all the difference. May 20th, 2013 was the last time I walked without assistance. Stricken with Guillain-Barré syndrome, a condition in which the immune system attacks the nerves, often causing paralysis, I walked into the ER but was paralyzed 4 hours later up to my waist. At the same time, our daughter, Emily Busey Templeton, was teaching in Moore. Her school was hit by an F5 tornado. We watched the tornado on TV and in the ER, powerless, and we couldn't reach her until the evening. Thankfully, she was okay. However, the terror of experiencing a tornado is life-changing. We're so grateful that she and her students were safe, yet she had to recover emotionally, and with courage she did. May 20th was a very long day for us and is etched in our memory. Life was different after that, but so much more empowering than we could have thought at the time. We learn from adversity, and every small thing in life cannot be taken for granted. My journey in recovery was long. Kathy was always there 24/7, and we shared each challenging day together. I met so many wonderful people along the way who helped me. I'm so grateful for them. I grew as a person and learned much about resilience, empathy, compassion, and life lessons from their stories. Courage is overcoming fear and doing what you think you cannot. I learned that you have a choice to give up, resigning yourself to your circumstance, or picking yourself up and without resignation, work to regain what was lost. Today I have limited use of my feet and some muscles, but I am mobile. I use the tools in my toolbox, my wheelchair, my braces, and my walker. I could not have imagined what life would be like after GBS, but I learned so much about myself and the power of love, faith, and hope. With the unconditional love from Kathy every day and family and friends, I accomplish more than I ever thought possible. We have overcome so much together, and we have been humbled by this journey. We look at life through a different spectrum today with gratitude and love. It makes you appreciate what is really important about life, the people who love you, and the people that you love. If life puts obstacles on your way, do what you can to overcome them. You may not know it, but life can still be wonderful. Love, faith, and the belief of others in you and yourself are powerful. I'm so grateful for those who have helped me. God, I know, was with me every minute of the day, and I took great strength and remarkable calmness in that. He never promised life would be easy, but he did say to be strong and of good courage, for he would always be with us, and he always is. God's grace and blessings upon you. I believe this challenge changed me for the better. Never give up. The next step, no matter how uncertain, may matter more than you know. God's love will guide you through the storm. I share this anniversary with love and gratitude. I know this man. He is 180 degrees different than he was before the paralysis. It's the most remarkable heart change. It's the most remarkable spiritual change. I remember him before. I know him now. God has used this tremendous challenge to do a miracle in his life. He can do that in all circumstances, the good and the bad. Now, I want to tell you one last story about how God can use you and I in ways that we can never imagine. Okay. Last week, my chief operating officer at the bank, his name is Jason, went to a conference in Las Vegas. And in the evening, so after the conference, one of the vendors had a food and drink, one of these kind of, appetizers, and they're selling their products, and all these bankers are there, and Jason is visiting with this guy. And he's telling him about the culture, which we also talk about in Sunday school, of our organization. It's very faith-based, it's very caring, very loving. And he was just telling this guy about what it was like to work there. He used to work at a place that didn't quite have that same culture. So he's sharing this with the guy, and the guy is from Nebraska, works at a bank up in Nebraska, and he goes, he said, your place where you work sounds just like Region Bank. And Jason goes, well, it is Region Bank. That is where I work. And the guy that he's talking to yells across the room at another guy and goes, Mike, you got to come over here. And so Mike comes over and he goes, this guy works at Region Bank. Now, again, this Region Bank, we're in Tulsa. We're not Bank of America. We're not Chase. We're not anything big. And this guy comes up and goes, oh my gosh, he said, I'm a 94X fanatic. I listen to the podcast. I listen to the daily devotional. It's completely changed our company. We even changed the name of our company because of the work that is being done there, from something to Dayspring Bank, which is in the Bible. And he said, it has completely changed my life. Would you please pass that along to Sean? I had no idea that the work that we are doing here is impacting somebody that far away. I had a similar experience Friday. I'm driving home, and I get a text from our U.S. Senator, James Lankford, and he says, hey, I've got a question that only you can answer. Will you please give me a call? And I'm like, oh, that's real scary. And so I call him back, and he said, hey, he's in the middle of writing a book about the state of our country and what it's going to take to turn it around. And he said, hey, I want to devote an entire chapter to what you all are doing with the faith in the work community and how it can change. I mean, you just have no idea. Yesterday morning, Friday morning, I had a meeting with a couple of guys, and they are in one of our roundtables, a 94X roundtable, and the gentleman started telling me story after story of young business leaders in their round table that are seeing unbelievable life change because of this work. And all we know is that we are just doing life one day at a time, right? We have no idea. Bill doesn't realize that the messages that he teaches in Sunday school, I use on daily devotionals and podcasts and touches 250,000 people. He has no idea. John, same way in here. He looks out and sees a small church. He doesn't realize the impact that we're having all over the world. So as we close, let's just remember that even when we can't see it, God is at work, okay? Even when we don't realize it, God is at work. In everything we do, everything we say, everybody we talk to, even when we're not around, God is working on our behalf. So let me close this out in prayer this morning.